The world of A Song of Ice and Fire has two kinds of magical trees. The Weirwood trees of Westeros, with their white bark and red leaves, and the black-barked and blue-leaved trees of Essos that produce Shade of the Evening, the favoured drink of the warlocks of Qarth. The latter trees are never specifically named in any of George R. R. Martin's works, so for simplicity, I'll refer to them as Shadewood trees in this video. The polar opposite colour schemes of these two kinds of magical tree invite us to speculate on how they relate to each other. Is it a purely symbolic pairing, or something more consequential to the plot? In a few places in the story, we hear of doors made partly of weirwood and partly of ebony. Ebony is the collective name for the black wood of several different kinds of trees in our own world. Perhaps the shadewood is one of them in the world of Ice and Fire. These black and white doors are encountered 3 times, once by Ned in King's Landing in the workshop of Tobo Mott of Qohor, once by Arya at the House of Black and White in Braavos, home to the Faceless Men, and once by Daenerys at the House of the Undying in Qarth. The only other place where we know weirwoods and black-wooded trees to coexist is in the God's Wood at Winterfell. Here the black trees are ironwoods, which may or may not be related to the shadewoods, but would certainly count as ebony. What is striking about this list of places is that each is primarily associated with a different kind of magic. Tobo Mott practices the magic necessary to rework Valyrian steel, which might not be as Valyrian as we're led to think. The Starks of Winterfell are descended from the Warg King through his daughters, and may have produced many generations of skin changers before those of the current story. The Faceless Men were involved in the very origins of Braavos, and only they seem to have the secret of face-changing magic. And the Undying are the most powerful warlocks in Qarth. Their immortality clearly drew from the magic of Shade of the Evening in some way. Beyond these, we only have the magic associated with the elements, like the ice magic of the others, or the fire magic of R'hllor, and one other, shadow binding. The magic practiced in the Shadowlands and their port city of Asshai, where Quaithe, Melisandre, and Mirri Maz Duur all learn their craft. This is probably the moment to show you the reason for this video, something I noticed on the World of Ice and Fire map. As artfully as I can, I've marked the locations of Winterfell, Braavos, Qarth, and Asshai with stars. They form a perfect straight line. I can't have been the first to notice this, but I've seen no mention of it as yet on Reddit, YouTube, or even through Google. And as we all know, if you don't have pictures, it didn't happen. The Lazarene city of Lazosh, of which we hear little, also lies on the same line, and in truth Winterfell is a fraction too far north on the official map. But the line connecting 4 such narratively important places and centres of magic is still so straight that it can't possibly be a coincidence. Particularly so as 3 out of 4 have these symbolic connections to the 2 kinds of magical trees in the story. If the 4th city, Asshai, also had a connection to the magical trees, then we'd know we were onto something. This is where I recommend a YouTube channel called The Disputed Lands. In her first ever video, Crowfoot's daughter of the Disputed Lands proposed the oily black stone from which Asshai is built may be the fossilized wood of the Shade of the Evening trees, or shadewood trees. As she argues, dead weirwoods are said by the maesters to turn to stone after 1,000 years instead of rotting. So might the other magical tree of the story not do the same? She also points out that both the buildings of Asshai and the shadewood trees are described as unexpectedly dark, said to drink the light and drink the morning sun in Martin's words. A link to this video is included below. If this is true, the wood must have come from somewhere within a transportable distance of Asshai. Crowfoot's daughter speculates this wood may have come from nearby Ulthos, but perhaps the Shadowlands themselves were once covered in shadewood trees, giving them their name, before they were cut down to build the enormous port city. Maybe a few such trees are still there. It seems a reasonable guess that shadowbinders in a Shadowlands full of Shade of the Evening trees might have been drawing their magical power from these very trees, just as the Greenseers on the other side of the world draw their magical power from the Weirwood trees. The symmetries are too promising to ignore. The magic seen in the 4 locations on the map have similarities, All of them seem to make some use of the spirits of human beings. Skin changers occupy the bodies of animals with their conscious spirits. The faceless men spiritually occupy the severed faces of the dead and merge them with their own. The Undying tried to drain the spiritual life force from Daenerys to add further to their own unnaturally long lives. And Shadowbinders like Melisandre extract some of the spiritual life force of a living man like Stannis to make a slave shadow that does their bidding. If all of this magic works in a similar way, perhaps that's because all of it derives from the black and white trees, one way or another. And suppose the wood of mixed black and white grains that made the door in the House of the Undying was something naturally occurring. Then the Weirwoods and the Shadewoods could even be connected, somewhere deep under the earth, forming a single giant world tree for the whole of Planetos, for which the line on the map is a symbolic clue. Old Norse mythology tells of a gigantic supernatural tree, Yggdrasil, that connects the 9 realms of gods and men. Yggdrasil was a great source of magical power, but its primary role was a stabilizing one. It held the 9 realms together. What is worrying about the world tree of Planetos, if it does exist, is that so much of it has been cut down. Huge numbers of weirwood trees were cut down in Westeros when the Andals invaded. And if Crowfoot's daughter is right, huge numbers of shadewood trees must have been cut down to build a Shai. The world of the current narrative in A Song of Ice and Fire is one of mysterious natural disasters, growing deserts, and prolonged unstable seasons. Could it be that this magical climate change is what happens when you've brought about too much magical deforestation? I still have as many questions as answers, and hope to return to this topic in another video. Until then, thanks for watching, and stay safe.